Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today we're going way back to the late 90s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the internet was like this new wild frontier,
Eh,
and we're going to be looking at the case of Liam Ewens and Amy Boyer.
okay.
It's a story that really, I think, highlights the dark side of those early online spaces
Yeah.
and raises a lot of questions that are actually still relevant even today.
It really shows how technology, even in its early stages, can be used in ways that nobody really anticipates.
Yeah, and what struck me about this case was Liam himself. He was so withdrawn in real life, but then online he created this whole other persona. He
Mm.
built this whole website dedicated to Amy Boyer, this girl he went to high school with.
Mhm.
And it wasn't just like a fan page or something. He was posting photos he'd taken of her descriptions.
Oh, wow.
And what's really unnerving is these really detailed fantasies and plans. It's
Yeah.
like he was broadcasting this obsession, but nobody was really picking up the signal.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that makes this case so fascinating and disturbing. It's a glimpse into the mind of someone who is clearly struggling and using the internet as an outlet
Yeah.
for his increasingly dark thoughts. And it really raises those questions of responsibility. Were there signs that could have been recognized? Could there have been interventions?
So let's take a step back and try to understand Liam's world.
Mm.
What was his life like before he became fixated on Amy?
Okay, so picture this young man living in a very crowded house. His mom, his aunt, siblings, a niece,
Wow.
people constantly coming and going. Yet even with all of this activity, he was incredibly isolated. Described himself as a ghost at Nishoa High School,
Oh, gosh.
which might sound like typical teenage angst, but it seems to have been more than that. He was actively avoiding interaction, fading into the background. And this, coupled with his very thin frame and his quiet nature, he was almost invisible.
Okay.
And he retreated into this burgeoning world of the internet,
Right.
finding solace and an outlet for his thoughts in these anonymous online spaces.
So it sounds like he was already struggling with feelings of isolation and loneliness.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Even before his obsession with Amy began.
Before this obsession with Amy began, and then there was this seemingly insignificant incident on the school bus
Right.
that just seemed to trigger something in him.
I read about that. Can you tell us more about what happened?
So it sounds so mundane.
Yeah.
A student was making noise, and a girl told him to be quiet.
Oh?
But to Liam, that girl was Amy Boyer.
Uh,
And this very brief, almost forgettable interaction became a pivotal moment. It sparked this intense infatuation that would only grow more obsessive over time.
it's hard to believe that something so small could have such a profound impact.
It really speaks to the complexities of human psychology, how something insignificant can become so magnified in the mind of someone who's already struggling.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that we often don't know the full story of what's going on in someone's life or what could be driving their behavior.
Right. And in Liam's case, his website dedicated to Amy became this outlet for all of his obsession.
Yeah, amyboy.com.
And he wasn't just posting, generic content. It was
Yeah.
deeply personal and unsettling.
Oh, it's disturbing. He posted photos he'd secretly taken of her,
Wow.
detailed descriptions of her appearance, and his own interpretations of their very limited interactions.
Hmm.
He would analyze these encounters, giving them a significance that only existed in his mind.
So he was creating this fantasy world
Exactly.
around her, a world where she was somehow connected to him in a way that she clearly wasn't in reality.
Precisely. He even documented driving to her house at night,
What?
taking more pictures, trying to piece together her life. He was consumed by this need to know everything about her,
Wow.
to insert himself into her world.
It's chilling to think about her going about her life completely unaware of this dark obsession that was growing around her. What was
Right.
her life like during all of this?
Amy's life was the complete opposite of Liam's. She was
Mhm.
vibrant and outgoing, beloved daughter, sister friend,
Mm-hmm.
active in her community, enjoyed her hobbies,
Mhm.
had a job, dreams for the future. They occupied completely different social circles.
Yeah.
By all accounts, she likely had no idea that he even existed.
That makes this whole story even more tragic.
Yeah.
It's like these two lives were on a collision course, but only one of them was aware of it.
Right. Makes you think about the dangers of anonymity, how easy it was to create these online personas back then, to
Yeah.
engage in behaviors that you'd never even consider in real life.
Absolutely. And that lack of accountability really comes into play when we look at how Liam's obsession took this terrifying turn. After high school, he really ramped up his efforts to track Amy down.
Yeah, his behavior escalated significantly. He tried to stalk her,
Mm-hmm.
became increasingly frustrated that, her life didn't revolve around him.
Right?
His online ramblings, those posts on his website, they just became more and more incoherent, filled with these disturbing fantasies that were clearly signs of his, deteriorating mental state.
Right.
He even wrote about a plan to set our house on fire.
It's like his online world and the real world were starting to blur, and those dark fantasies were starting to bleed into reality.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And there's this one detail that I find particularly chilling.
Mm.
Liam became fixated on knowing her every move.
Oh, wow.
He wanted to track her whereabouts, but he just couldn't figure out how to do it.
Mm.
That's when he came across a website called DocuSearch.
DocuSearch. I'm not familiar with that.
It was one of those early online investigation services.
Okay.
And for a fee, they would dig up personal information like work addresses using a variety of methods, some of which were, let's just say, ethically questionable.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah,
So this is where Liam's online obsession collides with the real world in a very dangerous way.
precisely. He used DocuSearch to obtain Amy's date of birth.
Uh-huh.
And then, using this tactic called pretexting, they tricked her into revealing her workplace address.
Oh, wow.
They pretended to be an insurance company, offering her a refund.
Mm.
It's just shocking how easily he was able to obtain this information.
Pretexting. That sounds incredibly deceptive. Wouldn't that have raised some red flags? Like, didn't anyone question why he was so interested in this information?
Well, that's the thing. Back then, there were very few safeguards in place.
Yeah.
The internet was still so new, and companies like DocuSearch weren't really thinking about the potential consequences of the information they were providing.
Right.
They weren't vetting their clients.
Wow.
They certainly weren't thinking about the ethical implications of their business practices.
It's almost unfathomable now, isn't it, to think that someone could just hand over someone else's work address without any real scrutiny?
Right.
It's terrifying to think about how that information could be misused.
It was a different time. The focus was on the possibilities of this new technology, not so much the potential dangers.
Right.
And unfortunately, Amy Boyer paid the ultimate price for that lack of foresight.
This is where the story takes that devastating turn. Armed with Amy's work address, Liam's obsession turned deadly.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about what happened?
On October 15th, 1999, Liam waited for Amy outside of her workplace. As she was leaving with some colleagues, he approached her car and shot her multiple times
Oh my gosh.
before turning the gun on himself. It was a very public, shocking act of violence that really just sent shockwaves through the entire community.
It's heartbreaking. I can only imagine the investigation must have uncovered even more disturbing details.
The investigation was very extensive. And, it revealed a lot about his state of mind leading up to the shooting. When police searched his room, they found a cache of firearms and ammunition,
Oh.
along with his computer, which held a trove of disturbing information. His websites, not just the one dedicated to Amy, were filled with years of really disturbing posts.
Oh gosh.
Fantasies about mass shootings, detailed plans to harm Amy, writings that revealed this, deep-seated hatred for women and a profound sense of isolation.
So many red flags, and yet they were missed.
It's a stark reminder of how difficult it can be to identify these individuals who pose a threat, especially when their behavior primarily manifests online.
Right.
Liam's case really sparked this whole debate about the responsibility of website hosts, about whether they had an obligation to monitor content, the limitations of early content moderation technology.
Mm-hmm.
It really highlighted that tension between online privacy and protection, which is a debate that continues to this day.
Yeah, it's a complex issue for sure. On the one hand, we want to protect freedom of speech and privacy, but on the other hand, we have this responsibility to prevent harm.
Right.
It's a question that becomes even more complicated when we consider the mental health aspect of this case.
Absolutely. Amy's stepfather, Tim Remsburg, became a vocal advocate for greater awareness of online threats. But he also believed that Liam's online posts were these cries for help that went unanswered.
Wow.
He felt that if someone had just noticed those red flags and intervened, maybe this tragedy could have been prevented.
That's a powerful perspective. It shifts the focus from Liam as solely a perpetrator to someone who might have also been a victim of his own mental health struggles. It adds another layer of complexity to this already multifaceted case.
It's a reminder that these cases are rarely black and white. There are often multiple factors at play, and it's important to consider all of them if we want to prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future.
And speaking of preventing future tragedies, one of the key legal developments that came out of this case was the lawsuit against DocuSearch, right?
Yes. Amy's family filed a lawsuit against DocuSearch, alleging negligence and invasion of privacy.
Okay.
Their argument was that DocuSearch had this responsibility to take reasonable steps to make sure that the information they provided wasn't being used for harmful purposes.
That seems reasonable. They were dealing with sensitive personal information. Shouldn't there have been some sort of safeguard in place?
Exactly. And what's so striking is that with just a simple internet search,
Right.
DocuSearch could have easily discovered Liam's website and his disturbing posts about Amy. They had the tools to connect the dots, but they failed to do so. It raises the question of whether they were willfully negligent or just oblivious to the potential harm that they were facilitating.
So they had the ability to see these red flags, to see the potential danger, but they chose to look the other way. That's incredibly disturbing. What was their defense? Did they acknowledge any wrongdoing?
Their defense was that they couldn't have reasonably foreseen Liam's actions and that expecting them to vet every client was unrealistic. They claimed that, providing Amy's work address was incidental because Liam already knew where she lived, essentially trying to downplay their role in the tragedy. They also defended their use of pretexting, arguing that it was a legitimate investigative technique.
So essentially, they were shifting the blame, saying that it wasn't their responsibility to prevent something that they couldn't have predicted. It sounds like they were trying to just distance themselves from the tragedy.
To a certain extent, yes.
Yeah.
They were operating in a legal gray area,
Yeah.
and they were trying to protect their business interests.
Right.
But the court didn't entirely agree with their arguments.
So what was the outcome of the lawsuit?
In 2004, 4 years after Amy's murder, DocuSearch settled with her family for $85,000. While it wasn't a huge sum, the case set a precedent and sent a message to other companies about the potential consequences of recklessly disseminating personal information.
It's a powerful example of how the legal system can be used to hold companies accountable for their role in these types of tragedies. I mean, it wasn't about the money for Amy's family, was it? It was about something much bigger.
You're absolutely right. For Amy's family, the lawsuit was about accountability, about sending a message that companies have a responsibility to protect people's privacy and to consider the potential consequences of their actions. They wanted to make sure that no other family would have to endure what they went through. They turned their grief into action.
Right.
And in doing so, they helped to shape the conversation around online safety for years to come.
And they championed a law in Amy's name, right? Tell us about Amy Boyer's law.
Amy Boyer's Law was introduced in 2000, and it was this very comprehensive piece of legislation that aimed to address a range of issues related to online safety and privacy. It included provisions related to cyber stalking inconsistencies in stalking laws across states, gun control, the sale of personal information without consent. It really sparked a national conversation about the need for stronger legal frameworks to address online threats.
It's a shame that the law wasn't ultimately enacted, but it's clear that Amy's case had a significant impact on the way we think about online safety and privacy today. It forced us to confront the dark side of the internet, the potential for it to be used to facilitate harm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Amy's case was a wake-up call, a reminder that technology, for all its benefits, can also be misused in dangerous ways.
Yeah.
It's up to all of us individuals, companies, and lawmakers to work together to create a safer online environment.
It's a conversation that's more relevant than ever, especially with the rise of social media and the increasing amount of our lives that we live online. But before we dive into those issues, let's take a moment to reflect on the human cost of this tragedy. What happened to Liam's family in the aftermath of the shooting?
Liam's family was devastated by his actions. They attended his funeral, which was a stark contrast to the large public gathering for Amy.
Oh, wow.
They described him as withdrawn and depressed. But ultimately, they were left grappling with the same questions that everyone else was asking: why?
It's hard to fathom the guilt and confusion they must have felt. They were likely struggling with the realization that they didn't truly know their own son, the extent of his darkness.
And they were left to deal with the consequences of his actions, the stigma, the judgment from the community. It's a reminder that these tragedies have ripple effects impacting not just the immediate victims,
Right.
but also the families and communities left to pick up the pieces.
It's a sobering reminder that there are often no easy answers or simple explanations in these cases. Just a profound sense of loss and a lingering question. What could have been done differently?
It's a question that haunts us all. And while we may never have definitive answers examining these cases, understanding the warning signs, advocating for greater awareness and prevention strategies is crucial.
It's clear that this case had a profound impact on so many lives, and it continues to raise these important questions about online safety, privacy, and, the responsibility we all share in preventing these kinds of tragedies. But looking back on this case, what are some of the key takeaways? What can we learn from Liam's story, especially as we try to understand and prevent similar incidents in the future?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is the importance of recognizing those warning
Yeah.
signs of potentially violent behavior, particularly in young men.
Yeah.
Experts have pointed to a number of red flags in Liam's case, things like his obsessive behavior, his social isolation, his fascination with violence, those increasingly dark fantasies that he documented online, and, of course, his access to firearms.
It's interesting you mention his online activity. His website, in a way, became this chilling chronicle of his descent into obsession and despair. It's almost like he was broadcasting his intentions, but nobody was tuned in to the right frequency.
That's a really powerful analogy.
Yeah.
His website wasn't just some random collection of thoughts. It was this window into his escalating obsession and his detachment from reality. He wrote about his desires to harm others, his plans for violence, his struggles with mental health.
Right.
It was all there in plain sight.
But at the time, there wasn't really a framework for understanding or addressing these kinds of online threats. It was a new frontier, and society was still trying to catch up.
Oh, absolutely. Liam's case really forced us to confront that dark side of the internet, its potential to facilitate harmful behavior and amplify dangerous ideologies.
Yeah.
It sparked a conversation about the role of online platforms in monitoring content, identifying potential threats, and providing support to those who might be at risk.
And it's a conversation that continues to this day, right? I mean, with the rise of social media, the sheer volume of content and the speed at which it spreads, the potential for online threats to translate into real-world violence feels even more urgent.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
While technology has evolved, so have the challenges of identifying and addressing online threats. We're dealing with algorithms, echo chambers, the spread of misinformation and extremist content,
Hmm.
cyberbullying, online harassment.
Right.
It's a complex landscape, and the
Yeah.
stakes are higher than ever.
So given all of that, what can we do? What are some concrete steps we can take to help prevent these future tragedies?
Well, I think awareness is key.
Oh, yeah.
We need to educate ourselves and our loved ones about those warning signs
Okay.
of potentially violent behavior, both
Okay.
online and offline. We need to pay attention to changes in behavior, expressions of anger or hatred, threats of violence, fascination with weapons, or violent content, social isolation,
Right.
and any indication that someone may be struggling with their mental health.
Yeah. Those are all important points. But it's not always easy to know when someone's just venting online versus when they're actually planning to harm someone.
You're right, it's a tough balance.
Yeah.
But even if we're unsure, it's always better to err on the side of caution.
Okay.
If you see something that concerns you, report it. Talk to someone you trust. Seek professional help if you think that someone might be in danger. We can't afford to be passive bystanders.
So it's a collective responsibility. We all have a role to play in creating a safer online environment. But what about the tech companies themselves? Don't they have a responsibility to make their platforms safer?
Absolutely. Platforms need to invest in those robust content moderation policies, develop effective tools for identifying and removing harmful content, and provide those support resources for users who might be at risk. They also need to be more transparent about their processes and accountable for their role in creating a safer online environment.
So it sounds like there needs to be this multi-pronged approach, a combination of individual awareness, responsible platform practices, and effective law enforcement strategies.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the key lessons from Liam and Amy's story. It's a reminder that we just can't afford to be complacent.
Right.
We have to continue to have these difficult conversations, challenge assumptions, and work together to create a world where tragedies like this become relics of the past.
Well, this deep dive has been a difficult but incredibly important journey. We've confronted some uncomfortable truths about human behavior, the dark side of technology, and the devastating consequences of inaction. But I think it's also given us a better understanding of the complexities of this issue and the steps that we can take to make a difference.
I completely agree. Liam and Amy's story is a tragedy, but it's also a catalyst for change.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a safer world, both online and offline. By being informed, being vigilant, being willing to speak up, we can make a difference.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We know it's been a heavy one, but we hope it sparked some important reflections. And here's a final thought provoking question for you to consider. How would this case have unfolded differently in today's digital landscape with its advanced technology, social media, and heightened awareness of online threats? Let us know your thoughts and be sure to tune in next time for another deep dive into a compelling and informative topic.